Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Debbie. Great to see you again.
For everyone joining today, I'm meeting with Marianne Boules, who is the founder and I guess CEO at Boules Consulting. Do you want to just give everyone a quick introduction of who you are and what you do?
Right. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here with Demi and talk about a project and passion that I am just so committed to. Like Demi said, I am the founder and CEO of Boules Consulting. We are a full service social impact consulting firm. And what that means is we work on everything and anything that has to do with social impact, especially in equity spaces, BIPOC spaces, and women plus spaces. And we especially are focused and excel in the grant cycle. So that's everything from pre-award work like grant writing, which we'll be talking about a lot today, and grant research, to even grant management and project implementation.
Great, thank you. So you kind of already introduced this, but people are probably wondering, well, why are we connecting, since I'm focused on sales proposals and you just talked a lot about nonprofits. But I thought it would be good just to sit down and talk about some of the differences and similarities between when you're selling an actual service or a product or versus when you're writing a proposal for, say, a grant, like you said. Because I do get some questions of, oh, can I use the information that I'm sharing on my website and on my YouTube channel? Like, is this applicable to grants? So I thought you and I can just kind of talk through it and share some of the differences and similarities from our perspectives. So just to kick things off, like in your opinion, what would you say are the main differences based on your background and your experience between the sales side of things, like what I do, where we're actually selling a product or a service, and grant proposals? And if you want to touch on the differences in writing them as well, if you have any thoughts on that too. But yeah, what would you say are the main differences?
Yeah, it's interesting because there is quite a lot of overlap. Like, for example, for both government grants and a government contract, you have an RFP or a NOFO, for example. And there's a lot of similar questions. Some of the main differences are first, and it's really subtle changes, I want to say. So you have to kind of like, for example, I do both. So I do proposal writing for my own company to get government contracts, and then I do grant writing on behalf of my clients. So honestly, the main difference, but like I said, it's subtle, is the fact that with contract work and for sale, for-profit proposals, you are providing a service that the government needs. So for example, like the government needs 1 million pieces of paper and you are a paper supplier. The government needs their facilities to be cleaned and you are a janitorial service provider. Whereas with grant writing, you are not doing a service that the government needs. You are doing a service that the people need, the community needs. And the government is paying you to do that service. So think about like the government. The government is not a company, right? In some ways it operates like a company, but its bottom line is not actually profits. Its bottom line is running a society, a big job for a company to run. And so sometimes but at the same time, they have to think about the profits, because if they're over leveraged, the whole thing falls down and we're back to a state of nature. So we have to, so sometimes when their departments, they're running numbers, they realize it's actually better for them to either hire a for-profit company to do janitorial services because it'll save them money, or it's more impactful for them to hire a nonprofit organization to do outreach. So for example, like here's just one like off the top of my head that I was just working on this morning. Who would do better at reaching out to like a low income Spanish speaking population? Is it the government, like, a bureaucrat, or would it be a nonprofit organization that specifically focuses on outreaching to low income Spanish speaking population in like this specific city, right? Their work is going to be so much more impactful, so much more effective than if the government was to do it. And so even though the processes are very similar, that is the biggest difference between a grant and a contract. When
Mhm.
it comes to processes, I would say the difference is even more subtle because, like I said, it's a lot of the same questions. But with contract work and for-profit proposal writing, you are convincing the government that you are the cheapest and the most efficient, and you could give them the biggest bang for your buck, for their buck. With grants, what you're actually doing is you're proving that there's a need, that the community needs a certain service or project, and you are convincing them that you're the best at it for the cheapest and the most effective and it's always going to come down to bottom line, but you
Mhm.
are you will do the best job for the least amount of money as well. But like you are unparalleled. And so that's why actually, like, when I speak with nonprofits, a lot of people go into the nonprofit field because they think like, okay, I'm a nonprofit, now give me my money, Mr. Uncle Sam, right? It's not like that. Actually, grant writing is so much more competitive than contract proposals. So that's just something that's a yet another difference and something else to think about.
Mhm. Yeah, that actually ties into one of the other questions that I had, which is so when we're like selling a product or a service, we we're like talking about kind of what you spoke to. Like we're thinking about, okay, what are the challenges that they're facing and what is it that they need to solve? And then how does our solution actually do this? Which is kind of similar for the community aspect of things. Um, but it's really focused on, okay, so if you buy our product, for example, you're going to like streamline your process, you're not going to have these issues. Maybe you're going to be able to hire more people or increase your revenue or something like that. um, so it's really focused on, okay, what are the buyers and their team, like whoever they're like trying to solve the problem for, like what are they experiencing? So I think it's interesting when you're talking about grants because it's like you said, like sometimes they're bureaucrats. They're maybe what you're getting the grant for isn't something that's going to like directly benefit them specifically. It's more like the community. So are you going out and doing like all of this research? Like are the grants for solving that particular problem, or are you saying, hey, like this is a problem? Because I know there are government grants and then there's also like, I guess, like private organizations that give grants as well.
Yeah, yeah.
But how does that kind of compare, like if you're thinking about like, okay, what are the pain points we're solving, um, and how do we like align this with the evaluator? Like are they looking for proof of impact, or do you need to kind of like even show them like that there is an issue and you need to solve it? Or I don't know, I'll just kind of stop there so you can.
Yeah, that's a good question. It does depend who you're applying to. You said it exactly right. There's foundation grant writing, which are usually philanthropies that are founded by super wealthy families or companies or organizations who are giving back either for tax purposes or because they care. But and for those, first the grant write by everything I said up about the difference between proposal writing and grant writing is in the context of government grant writing and proposal writing. Foundation grant writing is much more streamlined because you're not dealing with the US government or a municipality. You're dealing with families, people, companies, and it's more impact. They do like to see that like the most important thing is that they like to see that you are sustainable. They like to see that you have positive cash flow, but they really want to see that you can make the difference that you say that you're going to make the difference. And with foundation grant writing, it's very storytelling based. If
Mm,
you can tug at their heartstrings, you have the money. If you can make them feel what you want them to feel, you'll get the money. Whereas with government grant writing, it's a lot more like we will do this and then we will do this and we will measure it this way and we will report it to you that way. But with foundation grant writing, they do want to see some of that, but it is much more primarily, like I said, heart driven, ethos driven, storytelling driven. And so even if you're not perfect, you can still get the money. So that's where, for example, with like a brand new nonprofit, let's say you have no money, you have no proof of income, but you can convince a foundation that you are going to solve a problem that they care about, and you make them, you make them feel a certain way, you could actually get the money. Those are the most competitive because, like I said, foundations, because it's not like you're by yourself. There are a lot of other nonprofits who are just as driven as you, just as passionate as you. So it's still very, very competitive. So sometimes your sustainability efforts, your cash flow efforts will give you the bump up. and will make you more competitive. Like, okay, there's two very, very good nonprofits who I care about so much for me as the reviewer, but this one has, $200,000 sitting in their cash reserves. This one is, $200,000 in debt. Who am I going to give money to? And that's something else to think about with foundation grants. People tend to think of nonprofits as like giving money charity, but honestly, it's more of investments. I think it's better to reorient your mind and think about it as this funder is not a donor. He or she is an investor, and they want to have a high return on investment. It's not going to be financial investment, right? They're not going to put money in, get money out, but they want to see, like, if there's two nonprofits, you give $10,000 to this one and they help 100 people, or you give $10,000 nonprofits to this one, but they only help 10 people, they might want to go with the 100. That being said, they might this is where it gets really complicated, because maybe you'll help 10 people, but maybe for, the impact you do is deeper. Whereas maybe the 100 people, you're just kind of touching them, like, you just give them something and that's it. So it's really and that's where the storytelling piece comes in. Like, if you're only going to help 10 people with $10,000, you better make it clear that $10,000 is going so far to help those 10 people. And if you're helping 100 people, you better make it clear that this is exactly what you're going to do with that, and how you're going to help that 100 people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's interesting because, again, it's like two sides of a similar coin, I guess, with sales proposals versus the grant proposals, because the storytelling side of things when we're writing a sales proposal is really, it's very focused on, okay, like, what is life going to look like for this specific buyer or this company or this team when they implement the solution, whether it's a product or a service, and like, how is it going to change for them? And it sounds like in the case of grants, you're more focused on, this is how like the community can change, or this particular group, like their lives could change or something like that, or the environment, if it's like something like that. So one thing that I always recommend from the sales side is like having those conversations before you go and actually respond to the RFP, or before you write the proposal. So that way, kind of what their fears are and their hopes, and exactly what you can touch on in that storytelling. But I'm curious, on the grant side of things, like, are you able to do that research ahead of time? Like, do you typically have an opportunity to have those conversations with the evaluators, so like, okay, this person would really care about this like 10% impact, for example, because they are passionate about this thing, or is it more like, I guess, like more of like a veil between the people bidding for the grants and then the people evaluating?
Yeah, you're 100% right, Demi. And in my opinion, that's one of the biggest mistakes most nonprofits make, is they think that the writing is enough.
Mm-hmm.
The writing is the icing on the cake. The relationship building should be your biggest priority. Where the better relationships you foster, the more likely, even you could submit, honestly, like, I've seen it where people just submit a piece of paper, like, please give us this money, and they get $50,000 because the executive director was so close with the funder. And with governments, it's the same thing. Like, I'm working on a county grant right now. They had office hours. And so I attended those office hours because I'm having several clients apply to that grant. At the very, it's not much in the way of relationship building, but like you said, at least now I know exactly what they're looking for. I wrote down what they're looking for verbatim because I type fast, and I'm going to take those words and insert it into the proposal so that their own words are being mirrored back to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then something else I would add that maybe in the grant space we can do. I don't know if you could do it in the proposal writing space, but if you can, be a reviewer yourself, become an evaluator. So, for example, like this county that I work with, I apply to a lot of grants for this specific public health department in my county. So whenever I get the opportunity, I sit as the evaluator. So that way, to quote Hamilton, I'm in the room where it happens. I'm seeing exactly the way evaluators think, exactly what the county is looking for, and that informs my grant writing later when I work on that county. And so I do that with a lot, since I'm a grant writer, I pretty much will work with most government agencies that have some kind of social impact piece, which is every government agency. So I sit on a lot, like the US Department of Labor, Health and Human Services, DOJ, etc. So that's like an added thing that you can do, but relationship building, number one, with people that you can. And then even if you can't build a relationship because it's a bit more sterile, like I said, like a government agency, for example, still trying to get your foot in the door, like, even though they're bureaucrats, they're still human beings, right? And they care. So just to give an example, I'm working with actually she's a for-profit social enterprise, which is like a nonprofit, but they don't have a 501c3 status, but they still are mission driven. And I had her sit with on a meeting with the California's office of the California Office of Economic Development, of Small Business and Economic Development, and we pitched her story. And the other woman on the line who worked for the state of California was so moved by this woman's work that she set up meetings with like 5 other government entities to just sit and introduce ourselves. So, and then eventually it led to one that's having a huge, like, multi-million-dollar RFP coming out, that they basically have like a technical assistance person, and she put us in touch with that TA. So that TA could help us fine tune the application and make sure that our application is good for that RFP that's coming up. So never discount the power of relationships, but even if you can't do those relationships, be in the room where it happens to get the exact words that you need on the page to give it back to them.
I love that. Yeah, I had no idea that you could do that because I'm on the sales side of things. I will say, to my knowledge, I don't think there's a chance, other than unless your company's like releasing an RFP, then see if you can sit on in on the evaluation committee. But on the, I guess, for-profit side of things, the closest thing that I have done for our proposals is where we kind of stage our own evaluation before we send it out. So we like have the questions, the evaluation criteria, and then we go through and review it. But it's not as amazing and insightful as, like you said, like being able to actually sit and help evaluate and review. So I love that. That's such great advice. I had a follow-up question that has since slipped my mind, so I'll just move on to a different question. But I wanted to ask you, because you kind of talked about, like, I loved the point you said about, okay, in there I write down exactly what they say, and then we put this in the proposal, which is something that I recommend as well. Like, okay, well, what language are they using when they speak about whatever the solution is? And for example, if you say project management plan and they say implementation plan, but they're the same thing, say implementation plan, because that's like language.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's really great advice. But I was wondering about like the voice. You kind of touched on it with the storytelling aspect, and comparing that to, like, I guess, more dry government applications. I find that on the sales side, like, we normally try to use the voice of whatever the brand is of the company when we're writing the proposals. And they tend to be more, I would say, conversational, because like you said, you're writing to people at the end of the day, and you don't, at least I try to make sure it doesn't read like a legal document, because no one likes reading those and we want them to read the proposal. Yeah. But I'm curious, like, for grant proposals, like, what kind of voice are you using? Are you using more informal or more formal language, or does it really just depend on who the client and the evaluator is?
That's a good question. So with grant writing, like I said, grant writing is so competitive. I cannot understate the competitiveness of grant writing, especially with federal grants. Like, forget about it. Every university in the United States of America is applying to a research grant, right? And the bigger the pool of money, the more people get attracted to that opportunity. So yeah. That being said, whereas like with foundation grants, I would say more weight is given to storytelling. Storytelling still plays a role in grant writing for governments, but you have to be so tight. And it's also very limited. It's like, a couple, like 30 pages for, a 10-year, $100 million project that you want to run. Here's 10 pages. So you have to be so tight. You have to be so concrete, but also weave in those storytelling aspects. I would say it's interesting that you asked what do we use? It does depend on who you're applying to, you're right. But so sometimes it's slightly more informal. Actually, you know what? I take it back. I say it's mostly formal, but the main thread that I weave into all of my applications is inspirational.
Mm.
Like using words like world changing, unprecedented, innovative,
Yeah.
paradigm shifting, like that kind of language where because I really want the reviewer to get excited about the project that we're pitching for them. That's like, so for example, like I just finished in January, I finished $160 million grant opportunity from NSF. I'm sure if you're listening to this and you're a grant writer, you've probably heard about it, because like I said, the bigger the pool of money, the more people know about it. And that one was for like, they're more open to, for that one, they were more open about what kind of program we pitched them. It just had to be innovative. So like those were the words we used, like the exact words that I just mentioned. Sometimes like they already have the program. Like let's say, for example, like a Head Start, right? They want, or a First Five. There's no like innovation or world changing language, because it's just a program that they already have. They already have the exact deliverables they want you to do. They have the exact timeline they want you to do. So in that sense, you'll still use words to get them excited. You'll still use inspirational language, but then it's less about like world changing and more about impact, equity, lifting people out of poverty, sustainability, like you said, or a clean, like for environment, like clean energy, things like that. And so it's more, but with that, like it's much more formal, I would say, and very, very strengths driven, qualifications driven, because they just want to know the best person who could do it the most efficiently and the most effectively. And the most equitably as well. But that's another thing, is equitability might be more important on a grant writing side of things than maybe sales proposals side of things.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, because there are just so many similarities. I mean, I know there are probably people watching this who do both. I think we both have kind of specialized and then kind of dabbled a little bit, like in other ways. But yeah, I love the point about having them feel excited when they read your proposal, because I literally just wrote an email, I think like last week or something, where I was talking about this, about how even if you're just selling, like you said, like paper, I mean, that one would be hard, but ideally you want to read the proposal and be like, oh, I'm so excited to work with this paper company because we get XYZ, it's the best quality paper or something. I don't know, whatever their challenge is. But ideally you want them to read it and not just jump to the price and then be like, okay, well, this is price. Like you want them to actually read the proposal and be excited to work with you or to choose you in the case of grants. So I think that's like such a good point, that's one of the things that when I'm reviewing proposals for clients, that's normally the thing that I notice is like, oh, it's kind of missing that little inspirational element, like you said, because it's so easy when you're close to it to just get to like the facts and like, here's XYZ, and then you leave out that storytelling side of things. So that kind of leads into one of the questions I had, which is when you see someone writing grants, like grant proposals or working on them, like what are the most common mistakes that you've seen people do?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Where do I begin? Just off of the top of my head, nonprofits especially, one of the main points with a grant writing is that you need to communicate a sense of urgency. Like, we need to help these people, we need to help them now. Nonprofits will either just not have the sense of urgency, or they'll communicate the sense of urgency as a scarcity. Like, we don't have enough money, help us right now. Like, we don't, like, we're in debt, help us right now. Like, whereas so they put it as like, and that kind of actually leads to this like culture of like nonprofit scarcity. Like, we don't have enough money, we're in constant state of crisis. Imagine being a nonprofit employee where you're always hearing that we're in a constant state of crisis, like what that must do to your mental health. Like to know, and the way we treat our nonprofit employees too, that's a whole other question, like a whole other discussion for another day. But so like it's a fine, but because it's actually a fine line, because you have to demonstrate a sense of urgency but also prove that you're financially sustainable. And I think it's really simple, which is the sense of urgency is on the people you're serving, not because you're going to go bankrupt tomorrow, but because the people you need help needed help yesterday. And we need to communicate that. That's one. But I actually think the biggest mistake is that people don't have the systems in place to show and demonstrate impact. So they'll be like, we'll help 100 people. We help this many people a year. How do you even know? Like, they don't have like a data track, like in a simple Excel sheet that just where someone puts in the number, like how many people you helped every time you help them. Where did you get that number from? You just kind of like, you're like, it feels like I help 100 people. Like, and so let's say, and this happens a lot. Let's say you get the grant year one because they're like, wow, 100 people. And then the mid-year report is due and they're like, how many people did you help? And you're like, 100. But can you prove it? No. Okay. Like, so you like, basically what I'm saying is a lot of people, like nonprofits especially, have qualitative data, like stories, anecdotes. They don't have systems in place to track, record, and report on quantitative data. The most important thing is, and when I said, like, use the example, for example, of helping 100 people, it's not enough to just say you help them. What was the outcome of you helping them? So, like, for example, if you are a nonprofit mental health organization and your mission is to reduce stigma, you can't be like, okay, I spoke to like 100 people. I'm just using that number because it's simple. 100 people about mental health stigma. That shows a specific type of data that I call outreach and engagement, but it actually doesn't show the effectiveness of your organization. Something that would show the effectiveness of your organization would be like, I gave them a survey after I finished, like, let's say you went to a church and you gave a talk and you gave them a survey asking if this talk helped convince them to go see a therapist. And if you had like really good organizations would have their contact info, follow up with them 6 months later and be like, hey, so did you ever go to the therapist? And write it down. If you show, like, that's like different levels of data collection, right? That first one shows that you kind of did change people's minds. At least you planted the seeds to change people's minds. But that 6-month follow-up shows that you made that change. It happened. You were able, you didn't just plant the seeds, you reaped the fruits of your labor. And so I say data. And then also most people, I don't know why, like, I can't tell you how many calls I get a day for people who are like, I filed my nonprofit, can I get a grant? No, you cannot get a grant. I'm sorry. You can, really rare. I see it happen. It's not free money, people. Like, it's not. You get it. When what I mean is you're not grant ready. So people are not grant ready. Grant ready is you have your mission, you have your strategic plan, you have your your processes in place, you have your workflow, you have your programs concrete, and you know exactly what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, when you're going to do it. And it doesn't hurt to have a completed 990, not a postcard 990, but a full form 990, which usually happens after you hit $50,000 of revenue in 1 year. When you do that, then you're ready to actually start applying for grants. Why? Because remember what I said earlier about people think of nonprofits as charity, give me money, but it's not. It's give us, we are doing work, invest in us. When you are grant ready, that means that you have a proof of concept. You have shown that there's validity in the work that you do, and now you need people to continue investing in that work to get that ROI on the community that we want to see. So those are like those are the two biggest misconceptions about grants, is that it's just free money. All you need is a 501c3 and the government will just give you millions of dollars. If only. I'd have like 10 501c3s if that were the case. What was the other one that I said? Oh, and like falling into that scarcity mindset trap.
Yeah, I love the term grant ready. It makes me think of in the RFP, like sales RFP space, I will have companies who reach out who are really new and they don't have references, and like you said, they just like haven't hit some of those milestones to win. Like RFPs a lot of time are at least like $100,000. And if you've only had like $20,000 contracts or something like that, it's going to be really hard to actually win those because you just don't have the proof, kind of like you were talking about. So that's something I'm going to like steal that and be like RFP ready. You're not RFP ready quite
Yes.
yet. But it does make me think of something that you and I have talked about is especially like moving into the government space. I get a lot of people who are like, oh, okay, I want to go for this, this government RFP, whether it's local or state or something like that. And my recommendation for moving to the government space is to really, well, first either really evaluate and see, because like the hardest part is the references and having the references to be able to move into the government space.
Yes.
So I'm curious if that's similar on the grant side of things, like do they look at, would you ever say, oh, we like, I don't know, got these 3 grants, for example, or do you have to provide references or anything like that?
Yeah, you do. And that's why nonprofits, like as a nonprofit consultant, when someone wants to start a nonprofit, people are just like, we should do a whole other episode on the difference between businesses and nonprofits, which is there's not much of a difference other than people's mindsets.
Yeah.
But with like nonprofits, they will like, okay, how do I explain this? So for example, with businesses, you have income, right?
Mhm.
So you can keep yourself afloat until you get to that space, like you said, where you could get government agencies because you're selling a service. Nonprofits, very rarely. You're gonna catch 22, and you do have to show demonstrated history to get a grant, which would be one of your main forms of income theoretically.
Mm,
So until then, you have to rely on donors, and donors are fickle, and it's a whole other industry. And also, donors are not your customer, right? The people who that's like another catch-22 that nonprofits have, is the people they serve is different than the people who pay them,
yeah.
right? So that's why I always tell, like, whenever someone wants to start a nonprofit, I ask them, do you have to? You might be better off as a social enterprise like myself, than a
Mhm.
nonprofit. The only people who should really file for nonprofit is if the only way to help others is through donations. But if you could do it as a fee for service and sliding scale, even like for example, the mental health. I work with a mental health provider. They're a for-profit social enterprise. Those who can't afford get it for free. It's subsidized. How's it subsidized? By the higher paying customers who can afford their services. So like stuff like that.
Mhm.
But all that being said, you do have to show impact. You do have to show experience. And unfortunately, the only way to do that is if you can get donations, great, to do the work. But first step is to do the work and show impact. Like I said, get all of your systems in place to show actual outcomes and impact, not just outputs, which is like, we've talked to this many people, but it's more like, we help this many people get out of poverty. We help this many people find a job, etc.
Mhm.
So, and then you work with community partners, sales. Like with sales, the best way to get started is through subcontracts, right?
Mhm.
With nonprofits, work with community partners. And that could actually help you get a grant. Like, even if you don't have a grant already to show for yourself, if you say, we worked with this many, like this organization and this organization, and they're well known, and you did a small piece, that could actually leverage you to get a grant. But then you also need to build, kind of also same thing, build your way up. So like, start with foundation grants if you could get them. Once you get a foundation grant, see if you could get a county or city subcontract. That's a grant as well. And then work your way up. A lot of times I have nonprofits who jump right to the federal. Sometimes
Mm.
it works, very rare, very rarely. Most of the time it's money, time, and resources down the drain.
Mhm.
So yeah, and that's why I always have like a running list of all the grants that each of my clients have won, because it's always actually almost always a question on a grant application is, what other grants have you won? Because it relates back to what I said about, are you sustainable? Do you
Mhm.
have positive cash flow?
Interesting. Yeah, that I love learning about this side of things because yeah, I don't know very much about it. But that raised another question that I had, which is how do you know if it's if it's a good fit for your organization to respond to or apply to a specific grant? Because like in the case of sales side of things, like obviously the first thing like are they looking for our solution? Are they wanting to buy paper for selling paper? If they want to buy
Yeah.
pens, like maybe you don't bid on it. Um, ideally you definitely don't bid on it. But then the next step would be like, okay, if they're buying paper, do they want, I don't know enough paper examples, but do they want like white paper or I don't know, brown paper or something? And then you kind of like see like, okay, we align and we have all these examples. But since you're not selling something, like how do you identify if it's a good opportunity?
That is such a good question. And I'm going to add that also to misconceptions about grants. It comes back to your mission, your mission statement. So often there'll be like some RFP opportunity, $1 million that a nonprofit will be like, I want it, let's do it. And this nonprofit works on like mental health for the elderly. And this is like a Head Start application for like preschool, for preschoolers,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So they chase the money, like where the money is. They'll even like, I've had nonprofits where they'll add a whole new program, like just like pitch a whole new program that has nothing to do with their mission, because it just so happens that the federal government allotted like, you know, $1 billion to this effort, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, they're chasing the money. And that really does lead to scarcity, because you are one person or you're 5 people or however, you can't possibly be all things to all people. So that's why I said that. And it also comes back to that grant readiness piece that I said, which is know what your mission is, live what your mission is. When you have your mission in place and you fully understand what it is that you do, who you are, who you serve, then when the opportunity comes to you, it'll click, it'll just fit. And those are the ones where I see nonprofits getting money without even trying, right? Is because it just so happened that the perfect grant opportunity matched their mission statement to a T. And so look at the RFP opportunity and say, is this in my mission? Or is it, we call it mission creep, is it kind of expanding your mission and kind of making you lose your identity and you don't know who you are anymore? If it is, don't even go for it. Just pass it on to a community partner. Maybe like a part of that grant fits what you do. Maybe you could subcontract from a community partner who fits it better. That also leads to collaboration over competition, which I think is more effective at getting grants than, you know, like the traditional business mindset of every man or woman for themselves, leading like, which Demi, I know you and I like have done a bunch, right? We collaborate a lot on a lot of projects. So like give it to a community partner, that which will also build goodwill, so when they get an opportunity that fits you, it'll come to you as well. So but yeah, always comes back down to your mission. The strongest nonprofits are the ones with the strongest missions.
Yeah, I love that. I think it makes me think of I mean, you said like there are a lot of similarities between businesses in this, but I had a client once who had reached out because they found an RFP, and it was kind of a similar case where it was, I think it was a state of California RFP. I don't remember exactly, but it was, you know, so many tens of millions of dollars. And at the time they were, I think, a company of like 50 employees or something, and they were bidding to like staff for this specific contract 150 people onto this contract. So they were going to have to like triple or quadruple in size. I don't know the term right now, but so we talked through it, and they ended up not bidding because it would be really hard to show like, this is why you should choose us over someone who already has the staff or who maybe only needs to hire like 10 people or something. And it's like that kind of alignment like you were talking about. Like I would imagine if you're applying for a grant where you're kind of building out a new program, or you're like kind of stretching and it's different, it's going to be harder for you to compete with the other organizations who like are directly aligned and who already have it in place. So you're kind of, I would assume you're not wasting money, but it's probably not the best use of your time and energy if it's not a good fit for you.
Yeah, actually, same thing, same problem with a lot of nonprofits that come to my door is that, like I said, they're 50,000 in revenue, they want 150,000. Good rule of thumb is know that the amount given should be no more than 20% of your yearly revenue. I don't know if it's like that for sales. So like, for example, if you make 100,000 a year as a nonprofit, you probably shouldn't be going after opportunities that are more than 25,000. You can, like, I always believe in going for what you can, but like you have prioritization wise, as with resources wise, maybe 80% of your resources should be going after those $25,000 opportunities. And when you have the time, like on a down season, there isn't many opportunities, then you shoot for that 150 and see what happens, especially if it happens to just fit your mission so perfectly. If it just so happens that the eligibility requirement says it's looking for emerging nonprofits. I did help get a nonprofit that had like $20,000 in income get 50,000. And it was because that it just so happened to be focused on health equity for BIPOC populations, which they did. And they were specifically looking to support brand new nonprofits. It was perfect. So like never say never. But so yeah, good rule of thumb is 25%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think there's anything that specific, at least that I know of in the sales side of things. But I do see a lot of times with like references and things like that, like they want to know that you've done projects of a similar size before they're going to award it to you most of the time. Like sometimes maybe it's an easier solution, or they're just, especially on the corporate side of things, they're a little less strict than like, say, like a local government or something like that. But I do see like, well, if all of your references and your case studies are, say, like a $500,000 contract or project, it's going to be really hard to win this $10 million one because it's such a big difference.
Yeah. And it comes back to, because you have to price in scaling, and scaling is not easy. It's super risky. Like again, back on ROI, sustainability, like scaling that much that quickly is risky. So a government agency or a foundation or whoever is applying, first of all, they might not want to pay for your scaling, and two, why would they want to pay for the pricing in of scaling for something that might just totally collapse on itself?
Yeah.
The only people who really do that are like venture capitalists, which is another source of funding for a lot of different companies. But venture capitalism is notoriously volatile, as we all know, especially with everything that's been happening for that specific reason, because they force them to scale so much so fast, and so many of them fall and just catastrophize because of that process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's really interesting. I hadn't really thought of venture capitalists for nonprofits, but anyway, we can dive into that maybe in a future video, like different sources of funding or something. But I did want to ask you, because you talked about like how competitive they are from the grant side of things. And for sales proposals, I get asked this all the time. Like I'll have people reach out and say like, my win rate is awful. How do we improve our win rate? And I think for a lot of times there's like a misconception on what like a good win rate is. So it really depends on your approach. Like if you're only going after ones like opportunities that you have already talked to the buyers and all that, you're more likely to win and have a better win rate. Whereas if you find everything online and you just respond, like, of course you're going to have a low one. So some of the studies and research I found specifically for RFPs for for-profit companies is like anywhere between like 35 and 45% is kind of the average across the board. So if you're above that, great. If you're within it, that's good too. If you're below that, maybe there's a way to improve. So I didn't know if you knew if there's anything comparable for grant proposals as well, or if win rates are something that you guys look at.
So that's a good question. I actually don't know. I should probably ask ChatGPT. For nonprofits, they always ask me their win rate, and it's so hard, my win rate, and it's so hard to answer, because the smaller the nonprofit, the less likely they are to get funding. The bigger the nonprofit, the more likely they are to get funding. Same with the social enterprises I work with as well. And also, who are they applying to? So like if it's a small nonprofit that's super community based, and there's a foundation that's giving grants specifically to community-based organizations in that community, your chance of winning it is probably anywhere between 80 and 90%, especially if you're the only one serving this particular population. Whereas if you're like a super small community-based organization applying for a DOJ grant, chances are you're probably not going to get it, because they're going to fund like, a more established entity. So it is with smaller nonprofits, I would say like my win rate is anywhere between 10 to 20%, especially when I first started. Now I'm much more because I've been doing this for so long, I'm much more selective. Like I said, I'll only offer to do those opportunities that I think that will fit them. Like I said, a community-based organization applying to a community foundation, for example. Whereas like with bigger organizations, maybe my win rate is closer to 80 to 90%. And
Oh,
it's because like exactly like what you said though, which is that they have the resources in place to cultivate those relationships over 10, 20, 30 years. Like they don't just have relationships with a person on the inside, they have a relationship with the whole entire entity, the whole organization. Everyone knows who they are. It's just at that point, writing is just a what's that word?
like a formality almost.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that's just a formality at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I have seen also that when it's a smaller business, the win rates tend to be lower just because you're smaller, unless you're like really selective, like you said, with like, okay, we're only going to go after the ones that we're a really good fit for. But when you have like bigger competitors, they have that kind of brand recognition, and they also have the process in place and everything, like you mentioned,
Yes,
like
yeah.
show like, hey, we've done this, and they have the references. So then it's like, then you have to figure out like, how do we compete with them, which is more sales stuff. But probably for grants as well, where you're showing like, okay, our mission's really aligned, we get results and all of this stuff. But I wanted to ask you, so for people who are like actually who are thinking about maybe starting to write grants or who do write grants, like grant applications, what would you say are like the top 3 skills that they should develop whenever they like start working on these or to improve their win rates and things like that?
Yeah. First, be an excellent reader. So, I mean, that goes without saying. If you can't read an RFP, you're going to answer it very poorly.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't comprehend like the fine details, what's the in-betweens, the inferences, the implications that isn't on the page, you're not going to answer the question correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to be a good reader. And then this one, there's no way around it, but you have to be an excellent writer, like very good writer. I can't, you know how many times I've complained to you where I hired a grant writer and they can't write. You know, like the ideas are good while we're talking. They're very good with ideas, but they struggle to communicate it on the page. They don't have basic grammar. But I do think that they I think anybody can become a good writer.
Mm-hmm.
You just like it's a muscle. When I remember like in high school, my senior year of high school, I wrote an essay. My teacher took me after class and she was like, "This was the worst thing I've ever read."
Oh
But
my gosh.
yeah, yes, and she went with me and highlighted it, and like by the end of the year, like it was good. It was very good. Having her just destroy everything that I thought I knew about writing was so good for me. And because I didn't stop writing, it just got better and better and better, and it's so much better now, and I know I have a lot to learn as well. Like I know there's always a process. I'm always learning. So it's it's not like something you're born with, like, you know, I have black hair, I'm gonna, you know, it's not like, oh, you know, you can't change, like it's not like the color of your hair that you can't change. It's more like your body, like you can change it with time and effort. And so you have to be a very good writer, which I posit comes from being a good reader. If you're not a good reader, you can't be a good writer. You can be a
Mm-hmm.
good reader but not a good writer. And so, but you one precedes the other. And then the second thing that I would say is just like you can't also, like it's not enough to just be a good writer and a good reader. Those are the basic qualifications, but you have to know what you're talking about. So for example, the reason why I focus on social impact is because that's my background, is especially public policy, which touches a lot of things. So a lot of what I write about comes back to public policy, comes back to like policy transference, program transference, scaling, like I've been mentioning, replicating, piloting, etc. So pick a need. That's what, like, you know, you can be a generalist, and I've met a lot of generalists who are very good, who can write everything about like from medical technology to you know, like elderly care. But if you have a niche, you can take the time to actually learn about that niche. So a lot of times I'm not just attending grant writing webinars, I'm attending like nonprofit policy webinars. I'm attending like mental health webinars. I'm attending like diversity, equity, inclusion webinars because I want to learn more about the intricacies of what I'm writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's such a good point, is because I have a training that I will sometimes give where one of the points is like you feel like you can't write proposals because you're not a writer, and your point to like improving you can always improve your writing skill set, and we're all writing every day, emails and simple stuff like that, but the more that people pay attention to, like I have like an email of that I'll just like respond to emails. I don't use the notes app. I just send myself emails, which makes my inbox crazy, but it works. But I'll like send myself inspiration content, like, oh, this was a really good turn of phrase, or I liked that they used this word or something. And I'll just have like a running list of that for inspiration, both for proposals and then for other kinds of writing. But yeah, I think your point to like just reading and kind of just like dissecting what it is that you're reading too can help your improvement.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it does not hurt. Like, it's hard to be a good writer, to become a good writer, if you have no one critiquing your work. So like the story of the teacher, I would have never, I thought when I submitted to her, I remember beaming with pride. I was like, this is a work of art. But so it's good to have, and I wrote a short story, a kid's story recently. It took me 3 years to write because I sent it to so many people who just totally, you were one of them, who just like totally like found errors in it and helped me fix it. And the way it looks now is so different. I don't know if there's one word, the story's the same, like the plot is the same, but I don't know if one word is the same as I started out with. And so it's good to have, like, if you can, like, have a partner, grow thick skin, first of all. Like, do not take it personally. Like when like that's something that happens, is like, because it's writing is so vulnerable, so I know people don't want to share their work, or if someone like critiques their work, they're like, what do they know? Just get rid of your ego and be like, this is like, think of like engineering, like this is something I created, help me fix, like help me create, make a better infrastructure so that it could stand on its own. So like, grow thick skin, get a partner, and start critiquing each other's works. The more partners you have, like, that's, I think, has been my biggest strength, is I have had, especially as a working with so many other writers, is I have so many writers who just notice different things that I do wrong or that could be done better, that has just taken my writing from here to here, and I know probably in the future will go even higher.
Yeah, I think it's like such a good point, because I sometimes like criticism is, I feel like, especially as a writer, I mean, fiction writing is obviously sometimes completely different than proposal writing, and much more personal because you're like putting more of yourself into it. So
yeah.
But so it's, but then like at the end of the day, whether it's a proposal or like a story I wrote, I try to think about the end goal, especially proposal writing. Like now I can, like, people can like edit and criticize the writing. It's like, well, we wrote this proposal for a goal, so, and the goal is to win. So we need as much feedback and as many people to review it as possible to make sure that it's clear to everyone, because it's impossible to edit your own writing, because you'll just feel, your brain will fill in words, or you'll like think that it's clear and it's not clear. And I also think like sleeping on it also is really helpful for anyone who's like thinking about writing strategies. Like I often will draft something, even like an email to a client, I'll like draft it and let it sit either for a few hours or overnight, and then go back and reread it. And normally I have to like rewrite half of it and then I'll send it out. But yeah, the point about like just like getting the feedback, especially for proposals, your goal is to like get the grant or to win the contract or like get the project. And it's not like, it's not to be like the best writer, it's to connect with the buyer or the evaluator. And sometimes the way to do that is to take out a lot of times is to make it simpler and to not use your most eloquent and your broadest vocabulary. So then I think that helps you, like, well, it's like, okay, I'm not going to use this like 10 syllable word I know or something. We're going to use the simple one, even though maybe I can write this in a way that's a little bit more flowery and a little bit more literary, I guess. Like at the end of the day, this is a proposal and we want it to be clear. So I think that having that in mind has definitely helped me with like the criticism side of things. Like if people comment and say, oh, this is confusing, I know what we're saying, it's like, okay, well, they're not critiquing my words, they're critiquing what we're saying and what we're like, how we're selling this, which I think is like such a good point to really think about that. Okay, well, that was, I think, the last main question I had. So another one that I wanted to ask you is just if someone wanted to like work with you, how should they reach out to you, and is there anything that they should do to prepare before they contact you?
Yeah. So we do offer grant readiness services because of how many people came to my door looking for money and me realizing that they're just not in a place for it yet. So if you have nothing, don't worry about it. And I like, as a social enterprise, I do offer a sliding scale for smaller nonprofits who may not be able to afford me at, like, for example, larger agencies may have.
Mhm.
So you can find me at my website, www.boulesconsulting.org. Demi, if you don't mind putting it in the show notes.
Yes.
And you could just send me an email and just just tell me about yourself, and we can do, a complimentary consultation.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you wanted to share today?
Let's see. Nope. I thank you so much. This was
Yeah.
wonderful conversation. Got me thinking about things that I've never, like, that I knew that I'd never put into words.
Yeah, I learned so much. Thank you so much for sitting down and talking to me. And thank you everyone for watching. And yeah, thank you all.
Bye, Demi.